So this is a little bit different than what we usually do. This is not a vlog. I need to preface this. This is actually going to be our podcast. So let's tell you a little bit about when did we have a podcast? Back in 2013, we made about 5 or 6 podcasts that were on iTunes. You could download them, listen to them, and it was really cool, but you know what? We dropped the ball. We dropped the ball because we got pregnant and we ended up having twins, and the whole journey of being pregnant, I wish we had done more podcasts, but we didn't. And so, that's that. But here we have for you our experience when we were trying to pick out our donor. We talk about it. We tell you what we learned during that process and provide you with information that may help you with your journey to pick out your donor. We talk about various cryobanks. Okay, so I'll just shut up and stop babbling. Listen to the podcast. I have put the podcast over in video format because I wanted our viewers to be able to digest this if they wanted to. If it's not for you, hey, okay, it's not for you. Don't watch this video. If it works for you, great. We have a few more podcasts that I might do the same thing with those. If I do, look out for them. But hey, thanks for watching our channel as always and for subscribing if you haven't subscribed already. And if you find benefit in this, hit the thumbs up button. And you know what? Comment too. If you've got some dialogue, please lay it on us. Comment, ask questions, talk amongst yourselves. I'm not really sure who our listeners are. Our viewers are actually, in this case, listeners and viewers. And we'd love to get to know you. Thanks for joining us and enjoy this. Hey there, this is Kristen, and thank you for tuning into the Lesbian Parenting Podcast. This is episode number 2. A little bit about ourselves and why we've started these podcasts. Reason being is we ourselves we are working on getting pregnant, and we are lesbians, so we're wannabe gay parents, and we have gone, through this journey of figuring out what it's going to take for us to have kids, and we're looking for a community surrounding that, finding answers to our questions or what other people have been through, and we've had a difficult time finding that. So we came up with this podcast, and this is our second episode where we're going to talk about cryobanks, donors, and your bank account. So we're excited about today, and I'm going to turn it over to Marit to talk a little bit more about that.
Hi, everyone. This is Marit. Yeah, we're really interested in today's discussion because it is really such a hot topic when you're on this journey and you're trying to figure out what to do. Last time we talked about the difference between IUI versus ICI. And for Kristen and I, we decided what made the most sense, that statistically the odds were more in our favor to just go right to IUIs. We had found a great clinic that we love and a midwife that we knew we would love working with. And we just thought this was going to be the best route for us. Based on the orientation and our first meeting with the midwife, we'd sort of generally plotted out that, and our age, of course. We had generally plotted out that we'd be looking at around 6 months. We have to plan at least 6 months of trying just in case. And we thought that might come out to being around $3,000 of our budget. We decided that I would be the one to try to get pregnant, at least initially. And because of my age, we knew that we'd be getting close to the potential to be eligible for insurance benefits, hopefully after that 6-month period, give or take. So we sort of felt like we were in a good place. And we had several friends who had gotten pretty lucky, gotten pregnant fast. So we were like, oh, for sure, we were going to be trying in the early winter. And we thought by the summer, absolutely, hands down, we'd be pregnant, no problem. So that was, we definitely started off really excited, rearing to go, and there we went. So the first thing we had to do was to choose a cryobank. This step was pretty easy for us, wouldn't you say, Kristen?
Yeah, I think it was easy. Mart's stepmom works in the fertility world. I won't go into it, but anyway, she knows some fertility stuff. So she highly recommended California Cryobank, which is what we went with. And, we just that was the first cryobank. We went to their website and really liked the layout and the feel. It just sort of spoke to us in terms of, oh yeah, this is a company that looks like, it'd be a good fit for us. There were other cryobanks, though, that were options. We were given a list during our orientation of various approved cryobanks that had, particular accreditations.
Right. So all of these were FDA approved and, thought of as legitimate sources for donor sperm. And they included California Cryobank, New England Cryogenic Center. And I think those first two were definitely had sort of the stronger push only because it was helpful to be able to do this locally. And California Cryobank has a branch in Cambridge, and New England Cryogenic Center is also local. But some other ones were Fairfax Cryobank, International Cryogenics, Pacific Reproductive Services, the Sperm Bank of California, Zytex, and also Oregon Health and Science University. We didn't really go into exploring anything beyond California Cryobank. And I think we looked a little bit at the New England Cryogenic Center, but ultimately we just went with California Cryobank.
Yeah, when we were first looking, well, with orientation, one of the things that really amazed me was how expensive sperm was, because I think that's the one thing I didn't know going into this is what it was actually going to cost to buy sperm. So that was pretty amazing. I think, from that, we had an idea of what the cost would be, and that some sperm banks cost more than others. But I don't think we were really looking at cost. We sort of went just based on what we heard from other people and reputation. One of the things today I did was I was looking around at several of the sperm banks that were available and trying to get an idea of, just pricing. Like, I know what we paid for various things at California Cryobank. So I knew what we had paid there. So I was just sort of curious what some of these other places, like what they charge. And so when it comes down to it, they're all sort of similar, I want to say, somewhat similar.
I feel like costs may look a little bit different here and there, but probably in the end, it's not that drastic.
Yeah. So
there are other things that make them different, right?
Okay, well, first off, about cost. So you're going to see a price difference between different types of specimens. So generally the IUI specimen, which is the wash specimen, is the most expensive. And then comes your ICI, and then the IVF or the ART specimens are usually cheaper. And then, of course, and Mart's going to talk a little bit about this, but open donor versus anonymous donor, that cost can be different as well between the two. You'll pay more for an open donor type situation. So you can see all these various prices, but some of the things, like Mart was saying, it evens out a little bit is because there's these other fees that you don't really think about, and one of those is the registration fee. So when you register with the Cryobank to get access to possibly being one of their clients, you're going to possibly pay a fee. In some places you don't have to pay that fee, others you do. Some of the things, again, you might not think about necessarily are the price for shipping. In a lot of these situations, for example, even with California Cryobank, even though we're in Boston and there's a Boston office, there's a fee. I think there's a fee that we pay every time we go get a tank, right? So we don't have to pay for shipping. But some people that are in different states, you might have to pay a shipping charge for the tank to physically get to you, okay? So you have a shipping charge. So some companies have more expensive shipping fees than other companies. And then there's like a tank rental charge. So some companies charge you a tank rental charge, whereas others don't. So when you start adding up all these various types of fees, sometimes when a cryobank that might have a less expensive price for sperm, really, when you even it out with like all the other various prices, it might come on par with another place that looked more expensive because it balances out.
Right. So I guess the moral of the story is this pricing information is available from all of these cryobanks. And just remember that it's a lot more than just the vial.
If you want to talk about pricing, you can just go to each website and see what their fees are. But for us, again, going back to what people had talked about, we just always heard about California Cryobank, and we really did like their website, and we liked the various things that we had access to see and get a feel for the donors. And other cryobanks have the same types of things like staff impressions or donor essays and baby pictures, and some cryobanks even have adult pictures. But the general feel in the end for us was that California Cryobank was really, really good. And I have to say, I just wanted to add this in because a lot of people said, oh, well, California Cryobank charges a lot for their specimens, for their sperm. They're very expensive. But if you actually look at a lot of the underlying charges and what you get, I feel like it really evens out and it's not that much more expensive than some of these other places.
Kristen, I know today you were looking at some of the cryobanks. Was there anything that was unusual that differentiated, not cost, but just ways that you could search for donors, or something something about the company itself that stood out as differences to you, or not really?
Well, it's tough because some of the companies had more access to donor information without signing in
in getting registered than other companies, I guess, because they wanted to show you what they had to entice you to head to theirs. But I mean, I would say it's the general stuff. Like I'm a business person, so it's marketing, general feel and layout of the website. How inviting it felt to me, how comfortable and secure I felt doing this sensitive type of nature of business with a company, and how did they make me feel when I went to their website. And I think that you could see that by looking at all these various cryobanks, and we'll make a list on our blog so that you have some of these resources and you can go check them out for yourself. But in looking at the various websites, like some of them spoke to me more than others. So I think that the way I look at it is like looking at all these different websites today. I think you just have to go with your gut and what really feels like it's a good fit.
Right. So it's really a personal choice.
Yeah. And when we went to Boston Pride this summer, the California Cryobank had magnets that they gave out for free to people because they had like a booth there. So chances are if they might have been to Pride in your city, and they gave out these superhero sperm magnets. So those were sort of fun. It's not the only thing you should consider when picking a cryobank, but
yeah, probably not.
but the magnets were very fun.
So you started talking a little bit about choosing a donor in there when you were talking about the different kinds of specimens and a little bit like how you might choose a donor. And I think that I remember for us, that was definitely harder. Choosing the cryobank was like, okay, pick the cryobank, no big deal. But choosing a donor then, at least for the first time, was not so easy. Thank goodness there are not thousands and thousands of donors to choose from. I think that's one thing to note. The pool of donors is definitely, it's manageable, especially when you start breaking it down into the pieces that make sense for you and your partner. So for example, there might be medical aspects. For us, I know personally that helped us limit the pool only a teeny bit. We may have been looking for certain things like blood type or CMV status, which is one of the things that you get tested for in your before you start inseminating. But other than that, we weren't really that specific. So we narrowed it down that way. That probably took us to 50%. And then the other thing that you may want to consider is the donor is either open or an anonymous donor. And this will depend on the cryobank, but through the one that we're working with, you can definitely see right away whether it's an open or an anonymous donor. And that will, the price of the specimen is going to vary depending on whether it's an open or an anonymous donor. So that's something that as a couple, you really have to think about down the road. I think it's hard to say in the very beginning which may be important to you. There's actually some interesting documentaries that have been made recently that we'll put on our blog in case you haven't caught them, just about some of the considerations of children born from donor insemination and what that means down the line, and whether the donor was open or anonymous, and if the donor was anonymous, is there an opportunity once the child is 18 years old to reach out to that donor, and that kind of thing, and what that might mean for you and your family and the implications. And sort of an interesting, that's probably a topic in and of itself, but that's something that you need to consider when you're doing this. So cost is one thing, but also just down the road, how you think you might want to handle that. Now, an open donor doesn't mean that you're forced into having a relationship with the donor. But if that is important to you one day down the line for your kids to be able to find that person, that may be something you want to think about. I think on the surface, probably the most important thing for us were more like what I call personal characteristics, right? Like ethnicity, hair color, eye color, what kinds of areas in school this person studied, what kinds of hobbies they had, because I think we were looking for a donor that felt like my partner, or felt like they had something in common, or maybe even the childhood photos might have resembled my partner, that kind of thing.
Well, so one of the things is like this sperm is expensive. So not only are you going to have a child from the sperm someday that, but you want to make sure that you're going to, I don't know, the way I saw it is if like, you want to look for a sperm that's going to be like the right fit with like interesting like aspects that might be, a part of like who you are as a family now, that like fit well or remind you of like, I don't know, people in your family. But the other thing is like, if you're paying for this, you can like, it's like the cream of the crop. Keep using these terms that are really somewhat humorous. But anyway, so like, what you can look at things like what did they get on their SATs, what kind of scores they got on their SATs, what kind of postgraduate or graduate degrees they pursued, are they a doctor, are they a lawyer, and those types of things, which was really interesting. So I wanted to look at some of those things because if we can somewhat like gel together our genes. I don't know what I'm saying.
Well, I think I know what you're saying, but I mean, of course, there's no way of ever guaranteeing what that child will be like. But I think we all as parents have hopes and dreams, and whether you can have a biological child together with your partner, you're putting still your hopes and dreams and all the best of each other into that. And I think it's the same when you choose a donor, and it's probably a little fairy tale like. You start having this relationship with this person that you've never met, and you have all these hopes and dreams caught up in that. And so of course you want to pick someone that resonates with you and your family, or is reminds you of your partner.
I think you articulated that for me. But I think that was actually a really good point that you said. You get caught up, like you do get attached to your sperm that you pick. I really feel like you do. And that sounds like the craziest thing, because I think when we were picking out sperm, I'm like, yeah, right. We're looking at all these different variables and trying to figure out what's the best fit, and all looking at the baby pictures and all like who's the cutest, who looks like they, maybe look like me because Marit's having the baby. Like how can we bring some of those features maybe into that child? And when it comes down to it, I think you really do get attached to the sperm that you pick out. And so this is like one of the next things we're going to talk about is how many vials do you purchase? Because it's a little bit tricky. When we went to our orientation, they said to us, like I just said, it's easy to get very attached to a particular donor, but you really should only get a few bottles of sperm initially, because it's not necessarily that it's going to be the right fit. Like there are situations, and this was a whole thing, I never really thought about it, but you think of a married couple that's like married for years and they try to have kids like for years and years and years, and they couldn't have a kid. They get divorced. The woman gets remarried and she has a baby like right away. She gets pregnant. Like it's so easy. There are seriously, and again, this is not like, I'm not talking medically, but I've heard all these accounts that it is true that some sperm and some eggs just don't go together well. Right, Mart? I'm not like...
Well, there are scientific reasons in why that sometimes happens. And our midwife had in fact suggested that because we do have the opportunity to pick from a pool of donors, why get caught up in one? Use one donor for a few cycles, maybe 3 or 4. And if pregnancies aren't resulting from that, and, there aren't any other medical reasons you know of, you do have the option as a lesbian couple to switch donors. Why not try a different donor if that might improve your chances? But back to choosing a donor first, I think I did just want to point out, again, each sperm bank has a whole variety and differences in the ways that you can view information and select information and the kinds of information they offer. But I think we particularly like one of the aspects, which was, depending on the subscription you bought, but if you had a full access subscription to all the donor information, you could hear the donor conversations. And I think Kristen and I really appreciated that part because it was really interesting to actually hear the donor's voice and their tone, and how you could just get an impression on sort of how they really thought about things, how they answered questions. It was sort of interesting.
Well, I think it's like you're meeting your possible future child's parent.
Well, parent or?
Oh, well, I think that's tough. Yeah, I say parent, but I mean, this will be a piece of that child.
Right. Like that could be what your child's voice sounds like.
Exactly.
Or, how happy is this person? Or, how weird do they sound?
Yeah.
I mean, there were some that we discounted. We turned on the donor conversation and we were like, oh no, that's not going to work.
Yeah. Like I think a lot of the different cryobanks have various things that help you get to know the donor. But yeah, as you're going through and selecting, it's like you're getting all these little pieces that are allowing you to meet that person, to dig inside what their hobbies are, what their strengths are, and who they are as a person, the different people in their family. And it's just really interesting because it's really good that information is available. And I hope that everyone is able to pay, because I know a lot of places you have to pay extra for it. It's not like you just get that. Usually, like with California, you pay, the more money for the subscription to get access to that information. Various other cryobanks, you specifically pay for longer histories for a particular donor that you're interested in. But I guess my point is that it's an expense that really helps, in the sense that I feel like we were able with California to get to meet our potential future donors.
So you started also talking about a few minutes ago about how many vials to purchase. And I think we mentioned, do you purchase 3 or 4 like our midwife had suggested initially, just, to see if that worked. If it didn't work, then we could go back and choose a new donor. But the other piece that we learned later down the line is that you may purchase a few vials now, and in the meantime, you're going through several cycles trying to get pregnant. Well, what happened was we came back only to discover that donor was no longer available. And that actually happens quite a bit. So on our journey, we noticed that a few times actually, that donors, so even we had sorted, like we had saved like a whole selection of donors that were sort of our favorites, sort of like backups. And lo and behold, almost all of them were actually not available. And we went back for the second try to purchase more vials.
And then there's like this black market where people are like on these forums saying, does anyone have donor number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? And
well, it's not a black market, but
we need one desperately. Yeah, we need more.
You can. I mean, if you've purchased too many vials, if you find yourself in that situation, I know most cryobanks will probably purchase them back at a reduced fee, but certainly you can sell them to another client if that works. I mean, it's not like a secret. Anyway, that's another thing that I don't think we really thought would be an issue. But how many vials to purchase upfront? So I'm willing to put down this amount of money out of my bank account right now, not having any idea how many times it's going to take us to get pregnant, or if that donor is going to be available down the road.
Well, I think like one of the potential situations you can run into is you find a donor that you really like, and you just buy, let's say you buy like 4 vials because you're like, well, I don't know if this is going to be the right donor for me. And I also don't like when they buy the vials back, they only give you like 50% of what you paid for them. So it really is going to cost you money if you even in the buyback program, you don't get all your money back. So let's say you only buy 3 vials of this, donor that you really, really like, and you get pregnant. And then you say, hey, I want to have another child, down the road 2 years with the same donor. You go back, you go to buy the sperm, and there's none left. And it says they'll never be available again. And then that's it. Like you're not going to be able to have 2 children by the same sperm donor unless you buy it on the black market, unless it's available, and maybe it's not available. So
I think that there's 2 sides of that coin. One could be that you get pregnant right away, really great, lucky. And then you have a couple left and maybe you never wanted another child. And so now you have 2 extra vials that you're, paying for storage and they're just sitting there. And if you wanted to give them back, so to speak, you'd only get half price. Or like Kristen said, you actually wanted to have several more children and now you don't have enough and that donor's not available. So I think that's just all the pieces of the puzzle that you have to weigh.
But I think one of the other things we should bring in here is that the reason, so I guess in the past, just over the past few years, like 5 years, the guidelines have gotten more strict. So Mart was talking before about a documentary that we watched recently, and I forget what the name of it was, but we'll put it on with the show notes.
Donor Unknown.
Yeah. So we watched this documentary. So years ago, they didn't have guidelines in place to protect or know how many births were occurring from particular donors. So there could be a situation where a donor went in and gave like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of vials of sperm, and there could be like 100 kids out there that were born from this sperm, and no one has any kind of documentation, and there wasn't any kind of measure in place where it was necessary to keep control over the numbers there.
Right. So you would have an unlimited number of siblings out there.
Yeah.
And that documentary spoke to the sibling registry, the donor sibling registry that you can go to. We'll put that link on our website too if you hadn't heard of it. There's a lot of good information on that website too. But I guess the fact is now we actually don't really know for sure whether cryobanks have really have you instituted any limits. We don't actually really know that for a fact. I think we'd have to look into that a little bit more. But even just from our own experience, it seems like they're sort of cutting it off sooner than what we expected. So even just within a few months, I don't know if they're doing it by a certain number of pregnancies or these just happen to be donors that decided to stop participating. I'm not really sure. But it appears at the surface that practice isn't happening anymore. But we'll have to do a little bit more research to find out. So we thought it might help the folks out there. Maybe if you haven't done this yet and you're wondering, how much is this really going to cost me? Just to lay out some of the costs that we encountered along the way. And then you can do the math yourself based on how you think your journey will progress. So first of all, ovulation predictor kits. We talked about that last time. You're going to need a bunch of these along the way. And I happened to find the best pricing was on Amazon. I was able to get 20 Clear Blue Easy digital ovulation tests for $34, which was pretty good. A lot cheaper than getting them at your local pharmacy. And these were the digital ones that I found were the easiest to use. I didn't like the regular strips that you just dip in the urine and then you get a line or you don't get a line, because I always felt like it was very fuzzy. It was like, well, is that a positive or is that a half positive? Am I really not ovulating? I could never tell. So I liked the digital one where you get the smiley face or the no smiley face. There was never a question. That always worked for me really well. And I liked that you got 20 in a box because you could test, for 10 days of your cycle if you needed to, and you'd still have enough for next month. So I thought that worked out really well, but that's a cost, $34 a box right there. For us subscribing to view the full donor information, so the top package was $250 for that 3-month subscription. So that always worked out well for us when we were initially choosing a donor, because it didn't take us 3 months. It took us probably a few days to pick a donor. But then oftentimes, by the time we were ready to pick a new donor, if we got to that point, the 3-month subscription had lapsed. So $250 again. So just keep that in mind, that there are those subscription costs.
Yeah. And for California Cryobank, that cost, though, is for everything. So you get to see everything for every donor.
Right. It's the full access. The vials, at least with the Cryobank that we used, were anywhere from, this is a current 2013 price, $550 to $750, and that's per vial. That's a one-shot deal. It's a real small vial, but it's $550 to $750. The cost, of course, varies depending on whether it's an IUI vial or an ICI vial, and whether it's an open or anonymous donor. Some of the little costs that we did not think about originally that are out there for just things with the tank. So we mentioned that California Cryobank had a local branch near us in Cambridge. So it's called the tank branch transfer fee. So getting it from the main place in California to Cambridge costs $150. And then if you were doing local delivery, the costs were $125 to over $200, depending on the kind of shipping you wanted, like 3 days, overnight, that kind of thing. The Specimens Storage, so once the tank gets to wherever it's going, whether it's the main cryobank or to a local location like in Cambridge, there are storage fees, right? So unless you're having the tank shipped right to your house for just-in-time use, but if you're going to actually send it somewhere to be stored, which a lot of people do, on average, I think it was 6 months of storage cost $260. And then there were packages upwards of 6 months, depending, I think up to 10 years. There were different pricing algorithms. But if you bought at least 5 vials at any one time, you could get 1 year free of storage, which was a pretty good deal. I think we took advantage of that once. And if you buy at least 10 vials, you get 3 years of free storage. So they call these plan your family for tomorrow kinds of deals where, you may want to secure this donor so that you can have that donor readily available for you when you want to have further children in the future. And you'd have this for 3 years free of storage, which is sort of nice. I think Kristen alluded to the fact that we would go to the local office in Cambridge to pick up the tanks when we were ready. So that's called a tank rental fee, and that's $50. So every time you go there to pick up your vial because you're on your way to the office to do the IUI, that was $50. If you pick up your tank, let's say you pick it up today, and you think just based on your charting that you're probably going to have your IUI in, 2 or 3 days. Well, that's fine because the tank is actually good for several days because of the way they store it.
7 days.
7 days. In this case, not always, but in our case.
I think a lot of them, 7 days.
Just be careful because they think they're packaged differently. So you have to read the fine print.
Don't trust me. I do not want to be the reason that your sperm went bad.
Your cryobank will tell you. But anyway, so let's say you have it all planned out and you say, okay, I call them. I want to pick it up tomorrow. You schedule your pickup time. And because I'm going to have the IUI in 2 days. And you pick it up. You spend your $50 to pick it up. And then, I don't know, something happens. Either you never actually ovulate or some catastrophe happens in your life, you wind up basically never using the specimen, or just too many days lapse and your IUI winds up being late for some reason. If you bring that tank back because now the dry ice is gone, and they call that a tank swap fee. That's $25 to get more dry ice in it. And then this next thing is one of my pet peeves. And I've noticed this on a lot of cryobanks. So if anyone from a cryobank is listening to this, as women, we urge you to reconsider. They have same day processing fees that at California Cryobank are currently $75. And I actually noticed on a few other cryobank websites today that cost is sometimes higher, which I think is absolutely ridiculous because as much as we try to plan for our IUIs or we think we know when we're going to ovulate, Mother Nature doesn't always work that way. And I think it's absolutely ridiculous in an industry where we can't always guarantee when these kinds of things are going to happen that they would charge a same day processing fee. But that actually hit us a couple times where best laid plans, we thought we were going to schedule at least days in advance. And then, oops, got a positive ovulation predictor kit. And, we knew we had to go. So we had to pay extra for the tank, which sort of sucked.
Plus, I don't think they're not open on Saturday or Sundays. So
not on Sundays, I don't think. Yeah. So that's something to consider. When is the cryobank open? And then the other things, of course, you have to consider are things like driving to the place where you're going to have the IUI, unless you're doing it at home, of course. But if you're going to a medical office to have the IUIs, driving there, parking, if it's in a city, is that different depending on whether it's a weekday or a weekend? And then, of course, the cost for each IUI procedure, which, for most women in our situation doing this in, natural cycle with no known fertility problems, you do usually have to pay out of pocket. And for us, that was $175 for each visit. So if you were doing 2 IUIs in each cycle, that's $175 times 2 for that month. Sometimes the cost for different times of the week may be more or less. So for instance, some clinics may have a higher charge if the procedure is performed on the weekend. And then, of course, down the line, there's other costs. But if you have blood work done, that kind of thing. But this is just sort of like the basic. So you can take all those numbers and add them up in your head and all the various combinations. This gets pretty expensive over 6 months.
So basically when we thought, we need about $3,000, we didn't really factor in, I don't think we knew, like all this other stuff really adds up.
It all adds up for sure. So this is why a lot of couples actually can't do consecutive IUIs for 6 months or 7 months or 8 months or whatever it is that they need to do. Sometimes you have to take breaks or do it every few months because you just don't have enough money. And I think that's a real concern. And that's certainly not something that all couples have to think about. Somewhere through all of this, costs and stress and planning, you also have to try to remember to remain calm and relaxed and carry on with your life outside of trying to conceive. And I think that's a pretty big challenge. Sometimes that makes me laugh a little bit, actually, thinking about all of these lists of things and costs. And
that's why California Cryobank gave us sperm magnets, so that we can play with our magnets when we're feeling stressed.
Okay.
They're actually really cool. They're like Superwoman and or Wonder Woman. Anyway, I'll stop talking about my magnets.
So we hope that the information here today about the costs and how to choose a cryobank and choosing a donor was helpful, but we'd really love to hear also from you listeners out there, your specific experiences or other, little nifty things you may have found out along the way, especially if it's a savings tip. We'd love to hear from you, and maybe we can talk about that, or if you have questions about anything more specific, we could talk about that in another episode.